I'm going to invite my colleague Adam Isaacs onto the session now. Adam, if you could make yourself known to us all. Hi there, how are you?
Oh, afternoon, James. Very well, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Adam works for our public affairs agency, DGA, and he is going to be telling us a little bit about yesterday's budget, which I know you'll all be interested in. And then once Adam's done that, we're going to hear from BCP, and then we are going to invite Sonia from also from DGA to come and talk to us about a few other issues like DRS, EPR, and a couple of other things that are of relevance to the wholesale channel at the moment. So without further ado, Adam, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, James. Hopefully everyone can see these slides, hopefully on the screen now. And yeah, so as
Adam, well, before you kick off, I should have said,
yes.
If anyone's got any questions for Adam or Sonia, please do place them in the chat and we will pick those up afterwards. So yeah, if you've got any questions as they go through, please do put them in the chat. Sorry, Adam, over to you.
No worries at all. And yeah, looking forward to seeing questions in the chat and also views on what bi-monthly means. Very lively debate earlier. As everyone will probably know, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt delivered his budget yesterday. Now, the budget had 4 key themes. The first was removing obstacles to investment. Second was to tackle labour shortages and trying to get people into work. The third was to remove barriers which are preventing people from working. And the fourth was to make the UK a science and technology superpower. Now, the extent to which the budget delivered against those objectives is up for debate. But what we do know is this was a very politically focused budget. The Jeremy Hunt and the Conservatives wanted to restore an image of economic competency, very important to do so being down in the polls and having suffered the debacle of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, almost wrecking the country and the markets reacting to that. So that was the attempt with the budget, try and restore this image of competency. But perhaps you could say it did tick that box, but there was ultimately nothing in there to majorly alleviate cost of living impacts and to unlock consumer purchasing power. Now, I'll run through some of the key policies for those in the food and drink supply chain, notably alcohol, and Jeremy Hunt made a big point of announcing how the cost of beer in pubs will be cheaper than that of supermarkets. So alcohol duties were frozen up until the 1st of August. From 1st of August onwards, there's going to be an RPI increase, which is at 10.1%. So quite a hefty increase in the price of alcohol. However, beer in kegs, or all products in kegs, I should say, but beer specifically, will benefit from draft duty relief, which is a new policy introduced. And what that does is it widens the differential, essentially, of tax relief given to products sold in the on-trade compared to the off-trade, which is why you might have seen some stories in the news about how there's a better deal for beer in pubs. I think overall, though, you're looking at quite high increases in alcohol duty. Reports of wine going up by around 40p for bottles around above 12.5% ABV. And then tobacco will be going up by RPI, so that's 10.1% plus an extra 2% and plus an extra 6% for rolling tobacco. And those changes are instant. They actually came into effect at 6 p.m. yesterday. A major win for the sector is the fuel duty freeze. So that counts as the 5% cut, which was put on in the last budget. That's going to remain until April 2024. That should save everyone operating HGVs plenty of money, so really good to see that in the budget. The climate change agreement scheme has been continued. That scheme gives £600 million of tax relief on energy saving materials. So that means for anyone who wants to invest in energy saving materials such as solar panels, there is a bit of a tax relief there to support you in doing so and try and help the country meet its net zero target. The government is uprating vehicle excise duty for cars, vans and motorcycles in line with RPI, but to support the haulage sector, VED for HGVs is going to be frozen for 2023-2024, which is good news. Again, that said, the HGV levy, which had been paused for a couple of years to help businesses through COVID, that's going to be reintroduced. It's been slightly modified and simplified, and its new framing and focus is to try and encourage people to invest in more sustainable vehicles. But the headline there is that HGV levy is back. And then moving on to the next pot, which is business tax and investment allowance. Interesting on deposit return scheme. There's been a real debate about how that is going to be applied, and we've managed to get some clarity in the budget document. And that will not be applied to deposit amounts where deposits are returned, and HMRC will collect that on unreturned deposits. So finally, a bit of clarity there. Unsure on how that is actually going to be implemented. That's a problem for the deposit management organisation for another day. You would have seen that corporation tax has indeed gone up from 19% to 25%, but to replace the super deduction and slightly in line and to mitigate the corporation tax rise, the Chancellor announced the capital allowance scheme for 3 years, where every pound that a business invests is deductible from taxable profits. Hopefully that's beneficial to those who want to invest in plant machinery, and anything in relation to investments in depots is likely to be considered under that bracket. And then on employment and childcare, there was a real push to get people back into work. And the key pillar of that was returnerships, which are like apprenticeships for those over 50, a real sense that there's a big part of the workforce that the country has been missing out on. So returnerships will be introduced to try and get people over 50 back into work. There'll be simplified training courses, given that people over 50 already likely have plenty of skills. And then maybe tangential, maybe some of the people in your businesses will benefit from these other announcements, such as an extension of free childcare provision to all children aged 1 and 2. Originally, it was just for ages 3 and 4. And the amount of free childcare is being introduced as well. And the availability is being extended. The government are going to change minimum staff to child ratios from 1 to 4 to 1 to 5 to try and encourage more people to extend the availability of childcare for people. So that's a whirlwind tour of what was in the budget and what might affect all of your businesses. Very happy to take any questions at this point.
Yes, so I'm going to talk you through 4 big policy areas that are currently live and are upcoming, which are likely to impact a number of you on this call. So if we start with EPR, this is a policy that is now live. The new regulations apply to all businesses that handle and supply packaging to consumers into businesses. So if you're responsible for placing over 25 tonnes of packaging in a calendar year and have an annual turnover of more than 1 million, you will be in scope of EPR. If you're in scope of EPR, as of this month, it's now a mandatory requirement to capture your packaging data, and this data will be used to determine modulated fee rates, which will come into effect in 2024. So in effect, under modulated fees, the more environmentally friendly products will be charged at lower rates. So it's important to make yourself aware of what materials are being placed on the market, as the more environmentally efficient will help you to ensure that additional costs to your businesses are kept at a minimum. So under the scheme, products that are placed on the market are split into 2 categories. So they could either be non-household waste or household waste. The difference being that household waste incurs an additional fee. DEFRA have recently announced under the scheme that any primary packaging supplied by an obligated producer to another business that is not the end user must be reported as household during data submissions to regulators. So that means that all primary packaging supplied via multi-stage supply chains will be classified as household unless you can prove otherwise. So if you're in scope of EPR, you're likely to be impacted by this. The main reason DEFRA are saying that your waste could be classified as household and therefore incur an additional fee is because if you have primary packaging that has gone through multiple stages through the supply chain, they're saying it will be difficult to prove where it will end up. And actually, without that evidence and that proof, they're saying that waste will automatically be deemed as household. So in theory, if you supply a bottle of wine to a caterer, that caterer could sell that bottle of wine to a customer. So DEFRA is saying proving that bottle of wine won't end up in household waste could be difficult to evidence on scale. So as I just mentioned, if your waste is classified as household waste, it means you'll have to pay fees that cover the net cost to local authorities, in addition to the costs associated with PRNs. FWD are working very closely with DEFRA officials to feed in our concerns on this policy and also the potential cost this could add to the sector. And then we're working very, very closely with officials on this. On DRS, the government's response to the second DRS consultation was published earlier this year, which set out some of the details of the scheme. Notably, the go live date for the UK scheme was pushed back from 2024 until 1st of October 2025, but the government described this as a stretch target. An all-in scheme was confirmed, so that means containers from 50 millilitres to 3 millilitres will be included, and that aligns with Scotland, but glass will be excluded in England and Northern Ireland, but will be included in Wales and Scotland. A number of decisions are also being left to the Deposit Management Organisation, which is expected to be established by mid-2024 and will be managed by the industry. So, for example, the DMO could be responsible for a number of aspects, such as establishing the deposit level, confirming how and if VAT will be charged, and also exploring how online retailers can provide take-back services. So we know that regulatory alignment with Scotland is a big concern for a number of you on this call, so we can avoid that trading border between Scotland and the rest of the UK. The Scottish DRS scheme is due to go live this August, but it looks like potentially the scheme could be delayed as it has come up against a number of challenges recently. So firstly, the Westminster ministers have criticised the scheme. They're saying it's badly designed, it's inflationary, and actually could add to the cost of living crisis. So there's also questions over whether the Scottish scheme can legally go ahead if the Scottish government need that exemption from the Internal Markets Act. So for those who don't know what the Internal Markets Act is, it's basically a piece of legislation that states that there shouldn't be different regulatory requirements for products sold across the UK. So if the Scottish scheme did go ahead in August, it would add 20p on every product before it's sold, which would basically mean, in effect, different prices for the same product on their side of the border. So this is why an opt-out from the Internal Markets Act is crucial, because otherwise producers from the rest of the UK will be able to sell their products in Scotland without having to add the 20p to that cost. This would, of course, put Scottish producers at a disadvantage within the Scottish market, because products made in Scotland, as I just mentioned, which would have to adhere to the Scottish regulations, would end up being sold at significantly higher prices than similar products made elsewhere. So if the UK government refuses to reject this trade exemption, which has been requested by the Scottish government, which is looking very likely from reports, it looks like legally Scotland may not be able to go ahead with the scheme as planned, but whether or not this exemption is absolutely necessary to the launch of the scheme is currently being debated. This is good news for us. You know, if the Scotland scheme doesn't go ahead, it gives us more time to push that point for regulatory alignment for the sector. The other area we should mention is, you know, the rollout of the scheme could also potentially be impacted by the current leadership race in Scotland. We know Nicola Sturgeon was, you know, set on steamrolling this policy through, but the candidates left to replace her have all said that they would pause the rollout of the scheme and actually would consider changes to make it more viable for businesses. So whoever wins the leadership race will have an impact on the details of the scheme and potentially the go live date. So completely understand that regulatory alignment is extremely important for the sector, and we are meeting DEFRA officials on a regular basis to make the case that there should be one unified scheme across the UK. And then on single-use plastics, the government has a target to eliminate all avoidable plastic waste by 2042, and that was set out in their 25-year environmental plan. So a number of single-use plastic items have already been banned, as I'm sure you're aware, and not so recently, it was announced that plastic plates, trays, bowls and balloon sticks would be delayed from October 2023. The government are also considering, as part of its target, whether to ban commonly littered items such as wet wipes, tobacco filters and single-use plastic sachets. So we're likely to hear more on those products soon. I'm sure you've all seen, but there's also a big focus on the vaping industry and actually the environmental impact of single-use vapes. And the government are looking at options to ensure that the vaping sector plays a part in financing the waste that it causes. So the government are going to consult on options later this year, and one of the options is that vapes could be captured under the existing extended producer responsibility. The Scottish government are considering an outright ban on vape products and actually are currently consulting on it, but this is something the UK government has said they're not considering at the moment. But I think it's definitely one to watch because there's a lot of pressure from MPs calling for a ban. On national living wage, yes, we've seen big increases in national living wage recently and another rise in April. It was actually 2019 Conservative Party manifesto commitment to raise national living wage to reach 2/3 of median earners by 2024. So to reach that target, national living wage could increase by 6.3% to £11.08. That is not set in stone, and the 2024 rates could be slightly higher or lower than this. The Low Pay Commission have said it could be between, £10.82 to £11.35, but no decisions have been made yet, and it's up for consultation. So the Low Pay Commission, which is an independent body that advises the government on national living wage rates, will be publishing a consultation on the 2024 rates. We're expecting that in the next few weeks, and the consultation is likely to also look at the national living wage trajectory from 2024 and beyond. Every year we send out a survey to members to quantify the impact of the increases. So it's really important we have this data so we can explain to officials, why national living wage increases and why national living wage increases could potentially impact the sector, and to ensure that any increases are manageable for the wholesale sector as a whole. So those are the 4 policies areas I was just going to focus on. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sonia. Excellent as ever. Quick question for you, which has come through on text. Scotland and the blocking of the policy of DRS by the UK government, we've seen it flagged in the media. Do you think that's actually going to happen? Is that likely? Put you on the spot. As a Mystic Meg is no more, but you can assume that mantle.
I think from looking at reports and speaking to officials, I think it's highly likely that they will not give them that trading exemption. We've seen the Scottish government and we've seen the UK government intervene with the gender recognition bill, so they do have the powers to block Scottish legislation going through. So I think it's highly likely that we will see the UK government blocking it. I think it's a question over whether it actually potentially impacts the scheme. Can it legally go ahead or can it not? I think that remains to be seen.
So I think what you're saying is, yes, they probably will block it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the scheme is scuppered at that point. It could go ahead still, exactly, even without that consent from the UK government.
That is the debate that's going on at the moment.
Yeah. And do you think it's likely that when the new First Minister, so the replacement for Nicola Sturgeon, is in place at the end of this month, they will say, we've had a look at DRS, obviously it's complicated, there are a number of issues we need to resolve, we might well delay the implementation date of August? Do you think that's likely?
I think that's highly likely, and most of them have actually come out and said we want to delay Scottish DRS. I think they've realised putting Scottish businesses at a disadvantage is not something that you want to do in a cost of living crisis. So I think it's highly likely when we, get the new First Minister, which is going to be announced on the 27th of March, that we will have a delay to DRS. But you never know what can happen in politics. It changes day to day.
Yeah, exactly. But at this point, businesses should be planning for its implementation in August, as they have been doing. Don't just assume it's not going to go ahead on that date.
Never assume.
Full steam ahead until we're told otherwise. Okay, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much, Sonia.